They don't
Right.
have COVID for the last 3/4 of a year. They beat it. We didn't. They did.
Hmm.
And the whole world notices that too.
In light of kind of what we were talking about earlier with like socialism overall and how it kind of has gotten such a bad rap for the past 60, 70 years from all the attacks from the right wing, from, neoliberals, et cetera, we kind of see that same thing happening with China, who is an emerging economic superpower. So what, I know you've talked about China a good deal in their economic system. Can you first kind of explain to us how you would define China's economic system? Because it seems like it has a few different elements to it that don't make it, as just like, oh, this is strictly capitalist or strictly socialist. So how do you define the dynamics at play there in China and their economic system?
Good, a great question. Let me try in a short amount of time to do this. Let's start with what the Chinese themselves say. They refer to themselves as a socialist economy with Chinese characteristics. And what they're trying to say there is they're like socialisms in other parts of the world, but they're also different from them because they have a unique Chinese way of doing this. And remember, China is one of the oldest cultures and nations in the world. They are the largest country in the world. Many Americans don't seem to realize that for every American citizen, there are 4 Chinese citizens. That is, their population
Wow.
is 4 times the size of the United States. They also don't seem to understand some of the basic achievements of the Chinese economy over the last 25, 30 years. So let me begin by telling you about them, because if you don't understand this, everything about China is going to be muddled in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Over the last 30 years, the real wage in the United States, that is the amount of money you get adjusted for the prices you have to pay, has been stagnant. That is, we've averaged somewhere around 0.5% a year increase in what our wages allow us to buy. And given the fuzziness of all statistics, if you end up with a number like 0.5% a year, it's no change at all, because
Right.
there's so many things that the statistics don't quite capture
Margin
that you're
varies and all
really
that.
going nowhere. Over the same 25 years, over the same 25 years, the last 25 years, the average real wage, what a Chinese average worker can afford to buy with the wages he or she gets, has quadrupled. In other words,
Wow.
it's gone up 4 times. There's no contest.
Yeah.
If you
We
want to
can't imagine that here.
yeah, if you want to understand how Chinese working people feel about their system, imagine what Americans would feel if I had been able to say, as I wish I could have, that our standard of living for the average American working person is 4 times greater. The
I mean, just
Chinese do, the
think
Chinese
about
do not have debts like we do. They don't
you can.
need debts. Just like we
No.
didn't need to have debts the way we have now
Mm-hmm.
50 years ago, because our wages were going up, and that allowed us to buy and pay for
Mm-hmm.
a rising standard of living without
Right.
going into debt. Okay, this is a reality. For the last 30 years, the gross output of goods and services achieved by the Chinese economy has grown on average between 6 and 9% a year. Over the same 25 years, the total output of goods and services produced by the United States economy has grown between 2 and 3% a year. That's why they caught up, because they are growing faster. And
Mm-hmm.
this is not, I'm not endorsing China or preferring China. I'm just telling you, all of you watching or listening, these are realities. Most of the world is poor. In most of Asia, Africa, Latin America, people are poor. And one of the highest priorities they have is to stop being poor. Most Americans understand that perfectly well. So they want an economic system that is going to get them out of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Stand,
Mm-hmm.
Now, the most successful economy of this century is the People's Republic of China. There's just no way out. And that's why they are as powerful in the world as they have become. That's why they have the goodwill of so many parts of the world. And they have the enmity of some, and they've done bad things. That's not the issue. But you have to understand. So what have they done? The dominant political party there is the Communist Party. It controls that society from the top. No other party is able to contest what they do. So, and they've been in charge since their revolution brought them to power, which was in 1949. So it's now 70 years they've been there. And they had that famous leader at the beginning who won the revolution, Mao Zedong. He's dead, and he's been now followed by a succession of Chinese Communist Party leaders. But their idea of how to build the Chinese economy went as follows. We are not going to do what the Soviet Union did. That was the first socialist experiment in the 20th century. We're not going to make all the industries in this country owned and operated by the government. The Russians did that for all kinds of reasons we don't have time to go into. The Chinese made a decision around 1960-65 not to do that. They had started in that direction, but they changed. And they decided they want, here we go now, a mixed economy. That's the socialism, because the Communist Party, representing the working class, that's how they talk, is going to run everything. But we're going to allow private enterprises alongside state enterprises. Not only private enterprises owned and operated by Chinese citizens, but foreigners too. British, Japanese, American. We're gonna invite them in, and we're gonna say, we've got something for you here. We've got a well-educated, because we have a good school system, well-trained, disciplined labor force that's willing to work at a small fraction of the wage you're used to. So you can come here, get very good workers, and pay them way less. And that's good for your profits. Right. Number one. Number two, we are raising the wages of our workers quite steadily, which means they're going to be a fast-growing market because they're going to have more money each year, which means they're going to be going into stores to buy stuff. So if you come here into China, we're going to give you cheap labor and a growing market. And because we have 1.4 billion people, 4 times what the US has, this is going to be the biggest growing market in the world. Little footnote, General Motors sells more cars in China now than it does in the United States. That's the bigger market for them.
Right.
Now, what the Chinese said is, we want something from you. You get the cheap labor, you get access to the market. We want partners with you. We want to learn your technology. We want to learn what your businesses know how to do. We're very smart people. We can pick it up. We can develop our own, which they've done, and they've shown the world. So they had a system, which they have to this day, partly government-owned and operated enterprises, side by side with both Chinese private capitalist enterprises and foreign capitalist private enterprises. And I call them capitalist because they all use the employer-employee division of the workplace, which is what capitalism is.
Right.
We distinguish capitalism from slavery because in slavery, they had a master and a slave. And in feudalism, they had a lord and a serf. And what we have is an employer and an employee, which is both like and a little different from those earlier ones. The Chinese, at least so far, have not done away with the employer-employee. So when you hear me advocating a democratic workplace, they don't have that in China at this point. Not in the state enterprises, not in the private Chinese enterprises, and not in the foreign enterprises. They are all capitalist. Chinese and foreign are private, and the government is state capitalist, because in that situation, the employer is a state official. The question you can ask, and perfectly reasonable, is the commitment of the Chinese ultimately to get to the point where the workers literally run the enterprises, become democratic worker co-ops? They say that that's their objective, but it is a legitimate concern,
Right.
whether that's so far in the future that it's kind of lip service and maybe not all that much more. But that's how I would understand it. But Americans have to understand, they don't call their society communist. They never did. That's the name of their party, but they call what they have achieved a kind of socialism with special Chinese characteristics. And in addition to raising the standard of living of Chinese workers far beyond what anyone thought they could do, remember, because of the Cold War, the last 70 years, when the United States has given foreign aid to many countries around the world to help them get out of poverty, none of them have achieved it like the Chinese, who never got any foreign aid because of the Communist Party, which reinforces for me the sense, you want to get out of poverty, you got to change your system in basic ways. Otherwise, it's like you just said, Justin, a few minutes ago. It's like these government programs. The government gives a contract to a big business, or the government gives the money to the state or the town, which in turn signs a contract with a big business. The money all ends up flowing to big business, and we know how they distribute it. Fat dividends to their shareholders, fat pay packages to their CEO, and the minimum to those at the rest. In other words, they reproduce the inequality that is the problem this system has.
When you see China kind of going around to some of the other Asian countries and helping them build their infrastructure, right, helping them to become, to kind of get out of poverty, do you see that as a way for them to kind of kind of separate from America, separate from the American hegemonic economic framework, and be able to develop their own? And also on top of that, like, imagine if we kind of have been doing that for the past 50, 60, 70 years with Latin American countries, right? Countries on this side of the hemisphere actually increasing our trade partners, but instead, what did we do? We shipped out all of our jobs to some of those countries, and we started coups in those countries, and we completely destabilized the region, and now we don't have any trade partners if China and Asia kind of go and develop something with Europe. So is that what China's kind of looking forward in the future to do?
I think so. I think so. I think you can see it in that the Belt and Road Initiative around the world that you pointed to, helping other countries develop their transportation systems, their energy systems, and all of that. I think you can see it also in the COVID story. The Chinese have exported the overwhelming bulk of all the vaccines they've produced. They didn't do it only to get support around the world, but wow, when the American or Western European companies are holding on to their vaccines because they charge too much for poor countries to afford, but instead the ships are offloading the Chinese vaccines or the Russian vaccines, or until recently the Indian vaccines, nobody's missing the lesson here. One part of the world is taking care of profits for the already rich pharmaceutical companies. The Chinese, because the way they control their economy, were able to use the lockdown in the Wuhan area to make their COVID disappear. They don't have COVID for the last 3/4 of a year. They beat it. We didn't. They did. And the whole world notices that too. They're able to respond in an effective way so they can afford to export their vaccines and make that part of their foreign program to win friends and influence people. Of course they're going to do that. And I think the United States is being outmaneuvered over and over again. Here's a final point, which has a certain irony to it. The very money that in the end, if we're lucky, will trickle down into the pockets of middle income and low income Americans. You know what they're going to do besides paying off their debts, besides paying the landlord the rent they've been able to withhold for the last few months and all of that? They will finally go to Walmart or the mall.
Yeah.
And you know where what they'll buy? Something made in China. And so ironically, a part of this will go back there. And there's nothing much anymore you can do about that. Yeah. That cat is out of the bag and down the street. That's why my argument is we better understand that the United States is in a very different place. We're not soaring up. We're sliding down. China is soaring up. And that's not the end of the world. But we have to work something out, or else we're going to continue to go down. They're going to continue to go up. And lots of danger lurks in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's actually kind of funny the way you explain it. It almost feels like China kind of sees America for what it is, sees our culture for what it is, especially economically. They took advantage of that capitalist culture, that capitalist greed, and the need for more and more profits every single quarter. And if that means shipping a job, shipping a bunch of jobs, buying everything from China, just so that these companies can make more and more in this quarter, so that their executives can make more and more in the bonuses that when they're in those positions, they took advantage of that. They looked at a long-term program, a long-term strategy. And we can never do that in this country because, like you said, everything is so focused on quarterly profits. Everything is so focused on, how much money we're making right now for that quarterly earnings report so we can juice our stock price so then we can get more bonuses, right? It all just works together, and it's wild.
That's why it's a system issue. That's exactly right, Justin. Yeah. It's a system issue. The Chinese said it. They said the only way we're going to win is if we can make the capitalists do for us what we need to grow our economy. And the only way they'll do that for us, they're not going to do it out of kindness. They're not going to do it out of solidarity. They're not going to do it out of their religious beliefs. They're going to do it for the same reason they do everything else. If there's profit in it, it's like dropping little bits of corn, and the chicken is going to follow you because it eats the corn, even if you're leading it into the slaughterhouse. It's literally that image. Give them profits, and they'll come, and they'll build their factories here, and they'll give us their technology, and they'll do all these things because we're giving them extra profits until finally we're big enough to say, this game now is over, and we're switching to a new one. And, it's like a mousetrap. At that point, the thing has come down. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. Really.
Yes, I know you got to go. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, Professor Wolff. I feel like I've learned so much in this past hour. I wish I would have had you as my economics professor, and I think I probably would have known a lot of this stuff a lot earlier. So I really appreciate it. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find you, where they can, listen if you're on a podcast or anything like that? Why don't you let the audience know about that?
We have a big presence on YouTube. I do a weekly radio and television show called Economic Update. It's free, available to you on YouTube. Just go YouTube/Economic Update. It'll take you right there. We also have a big presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we maintain a website where you can get to everything we do. And the easiest way to note it, it's all one word: Democracy at Work. That's all one word, .info. democracyatwork.info. Be my guest. Go there. Everything's free. And it's a way to connect to everything that we do. And if any of this today was of interest, you can find more of it there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show. You're welcome back anytime. I'd love to dive more into this stuff even deeper than we did this time. So
I would love to. I would love to. And thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. All right. Thank you, Professor Wolff.
Bye-bye.